Welcome to A Narrative of Love, a series of conversations with thinkers, leaders, and spiritual teachers about their understanding of love and how they see the significance of love in our personal and political lives. I'm Scherto Gill, and I'm your host for today's conversation. With us today is Thomas Hübl, a renowned teacher, author, and international facilitator. Thomas' lifelong work integrates the core insights of the great wisdom traditions and mysticism with the discoveries of science. He has the gift of articulating clearly his analysis of collective trauma and healing. For nearly 2 decades, Thomas has taught and facilitated the collective healing programs worldwide. He's the author of a book entitled Healing Collective Trauma, a process for integrating our intergenerational and cultural wounds. Welcome, Thomas. So delighted to have you on this program. At the start, I'm going to ask you, as a contemporary mystic, you must have drank from many different traditions. How did you choose the traditions or teachers? And how did you know that these were the ones whose wisdom would guide you on your own path in terms of your own development?
Yeah, first of all, Scherto, it's great that we are here. Thank you for this invitation. I think it's very generous, and I'm honored to be here with you. And yeah, I think, like many things in life, I think it's about listening to resonance, and I think all the traditions or streams, the mystical traditions that I resonate with, is something that I felt deeply in my core. It's like, you somehow feel inside, it's more than thinking about, that you have a kind of an attraction to a certain quality. And Taoism, for example, has that for me, or Kabbalah in Judaism has that for me. And also Tibetan Buddhism has that for me. But then I found out that it didn't really matter into which core of the mystical tradition. I'm not talking just about the religious environment and the core of the mystical lineage and the mystical knowledge that has been passed on of generation to generation to generation. There I found so many similarities. They have been named differently, they have been taught differently, they have a different cultural clothing, but the essence of it, I found, is very, very similar. And I started to look at what's actually the essence of the mystical traditions, and what is the wisdom that we can bring into a dialogue with modern science, neuroscience, trauma science, psychotherapy, and any other science. And I find this dialogue simply deeply interesting and inspiring and creative, and also with all the frictions and all the synchronicities that it has. So yeah, that was a bit my path with the mystical traditions, more like an inner resonance. And I had this feeling also in my 4-year meditation retreat that, there was a deep a sense of guidance or a sense of knowing, to how to navigate through the territory. And I think the same sense is also what brought me in contact with different mystical traditions.
Thank you. So just follow that thought. It's always been recognized that the centrality of mysticism is actually love. And I just wondered whether you would say more about love. And I would be very curious in terms of what would constitute a narrative of love for you, drawing on your own particular practice of mysticism.
Yeah, I think love comes with like a few ingredients. It comes with, if I speak to you right now and I listen to you, then I need to, in order for you to inform me, I need to have a space for you inside of me. So I need to make space for you in me, that that I can feel you inside of myself, because the you that I see is already, I see you in my perception. I don't see you out there. What I see is already coded into my sense perception. And I think being able to have a space, to make space for somebody else in ourselves, is a key ingredient. The other part is like, because that comes with feeling and sensing, and that makes relation specific, because I'm not talking to anybody right now, I'm talking to you. So my whole experience of you is tuned in, is in resonance with, is being, letting myself be informed by you and responding to you. And so this I feel you feeling me is a core essence of relating. And then I think one more aspect is that's where care comes in, because if I am in relation with you, I also, and I feel you, and you're not just outside of myself, you're not just over there. Same as the collective is not just around us or out there somewhere. The collective is also in us as much as it's around us, as we are part of the collective. And so love can be very specific. One person can be like specific on a bigger scale, like a part of our population, a part of a society, or can be humanity. It's specific for humanity. So love always has a universal aspect and has a very specific aspect. And I think that's like making space, feeling and sensing and resonating. The language of relation or relating is resonance, and care are key elements that compose a sense of love. And that's true when I relate to a baby, because it's specific. You know, my nervous system goes into a state when I relate to a baby. And then when I talk to my business partner, there's another relation, but it's specifically to him or her, it's specific, and it's now specific to you. And I think, because I often say specificity is love. It's present relating that is specific.
It's beautiful. Thank you so much. This is an almost enchanting way of understanding love. Now, often the mystics would say that love is nourished from within by turning the soul towards its source. But in effect, when we live love, we are loving. It's almost like an eager and expressive, a generative act of being out there, as if acting upon a calling. I think it was Emmanuel Levinas, a French philosopher, who talked about love in this way. He said, love is actually our response to that calling, as if when we as ourselves accept that calling, then we accept being infinitely responsible for the other. So that care comes from that, sort of infinitely responsible, the infinite responsibility for the other, almost like as if love has no desire for reciprocity. Would you comment on that? Is that how you understand it?
Yeah, that's what I meant before, because love is universal. That's the source. That's what creates us. And love is specific. So like in the Bible, like when this the moment where the divine voice appears to the Israelites gathered around Mount Sinai, it's written that everybody says afterwards, my God spoke to me personally. God spoke to my life. Not God said something universal that you know, it's kind of an abstract. No, it spoke to me. And so the most universal, like, or the Tao, like man follows earth, follows the universe, follows the Tao, like when the most universal power appears in the most specific related aspect of life. And that's why, like sometimes also in the spiritual development, when people say, oh, it doesn't matter because it's anyway universal. No, it matters because every moment matters, because love is caring specifically. And so it's the most universal expressed in the most specific situation, you know, the most mundane situation in life. And they are not two. So the most universal and the most specific are not two. And and so that relates a lot to what you said. And then the nourishment, like the being connected to that to that source of life, the source of the universe, is also a tremendous source of energy. It's a tremendous fuel for our life because we feel simply connected to the larger context. We are not living in isolation, and trauma always creates a sense of separation, isolation, like not being safe. And that isolation leads to a drain of energy, that leads to depression, that leads to separation, to othering, to many of the symptoms we see in our society. But love is the kind of a free expression of that kind of internal openness to from universal to specific.
Let's just take that personal love is experienced as a personal, both personal and universal, as a starting point to enter your life story. I won't ask you to repeat because you have explained this elsewhere. But in early days, you were doing you were studying medicine at university. But at the same time, you were volunteer of you were part of the Paramedic and did what 9-10 years of volunteering and so on. Does that illustrates that you're acting upon a calling? In terms, did you experience that as a calling, or is it in retrospectively a sort of form of calling? People, you were so eager to volunteer your time. You have accompanied lots of people in their last bit of a journey, and that's very powerful experience. So that's one question, looking at your own journey. The other part is later after your mystical training and cultivation, you started to work with groups of people, and in the early days of your work, you have observed the symptoms of a large group of people in the workshop. You suddenly experience breakdown together, and that was the entry point for you to explore collective trauma. So one is about your own experience of calling, or if there is one, or there had ever been one. And secondly is your experience of other people exhibiting symptoms of collective trauma. Does it also reflect it back to you in terms of your own reflection on how you may have experienced the trauma in your life?
Yeah, first of all, yes, to the first question of the calling, like my time as like working as a volunteer for the Red Cross was definitely part of my calling. And also looking backwards from now, I can see how it put me in touch with so many aspects that I'm passionate about now. I mean, the non-for-profit work in the world is a big part of what I really value. The being in contact with trauma all the time as a paramedic in very urgent, you know, difficult circumstances, being exposed to it, but also being affected by it, and seeing people being traumatized and being one of the first ones to decide how that trauma will manifest or manifest less through care, through relation, through like really being with a traumatized person that got traumatized right now, just a few minutes ago. And also, and another aspect was me learning, like I was in every walk of life through being a paramedic, from the most poor people in the society to the most rich people of the society. Like I've seen basically any kind of home, any kind of life circumstances, because I did that very intensively also at that time. And it taught me a lot about life. Also, while I was studying medicine at the time, so it taught me a lot about life itself. It was a great school or a great studying. And yes, then when I transitioned from my 4-year meditation retreat to my first retreats, and then after 2 years, what you described, it especially in the groups in Germany, that a lot of the collective trauma, what I call today collective trauma, started to appear. So I got to learn a lot about how the hidden collective fragmentation, what happens when we create enough group coherence and enough relational awareness of each other and enough relational safety, that basically our collective nervous systems, all of us together feeling safe enough, induces a detox process. And the detox process, the nervous system starts to release stored information, like trauma information or past, that is stored deeply in the part of our nervous, because I don't believe in a personal nervous system. I not only believe, I think that notion is simply wrong, even scientifically, that I'm just like that this body is just a person and my nervous system is a person. My body is millions of years old. My nervous system is maybe a little bit less old, like complex nervous systems are a bit, but they're also very old. And that Thomas has a, like there is a personal wiring that all my experiences are wired in my nervous system. But I believe we all have much bigger interior spaces, that we also have a collective part of our nervous system, an ancestral part of our nervous system. And that's why the collective is not just out there, many people. The collective lives in me as much as it lives around me. It's like the whole system. That's why trauma is also not just a personal experience, it's a personal, ancestral, and collective interdependent system. And so the interdependence of the personal, ancestral, and collective trauma is suddenly what showed up in my groups. And of course, today I'm looking at this in a much more sophisticated way because I learned a lot in these 20 years. But what I saw already then is how presence, relation, group coherence, mutual listening, creating a healing space or a healing environment, and fragmentation, trauma, stored past, detoxing, and post-traumatic learning or growth are somehow connected. I saw this in every group that I did from that time on. And so that that system of trauma that results in the attachment trauma, but in order for there to be attachment trauma, the parents are already traumatized, the grandparents were traumatized, my grandparents were traumatized in the Second World War. I grew up as a boy in an environment, of post-World War II Austria, Vienna, and nobody told me, listen, Thomas, that your grandmother reacts like this, and that my grandmother and my grandfather have that relation, and that my mother has this and this experience. These are trauma symptoms. Nobody, so I thought, okay, that's life at that time as a boy. And I just was affected by the dynamics, also the dynamics at school or like in all kinds of social environments. But I always felt, even as a child already, that like the strange numbness in the society. There was something strange about the numbness that I felt very often as a child that I didn't know at the time how to make sense of that, of course, but the collective dissociation and the collective absence, how I would talk about this today, that there's a massive absence of information that is the signature of trauma. I didn't understand then. So for me, oh, that's how life feels. And I think for many people, for many of us, we didn't get any, post-it stickers that say, okay, that's trauma, like a kind of a manual for a traumatized world. And that's why we might easily think and experience that that's the world, how it is, like that's how the world is, or that's normal. And I think that's one of the main symptoms, that we normalize trauma over thousands of years. And we are not able to differentiate trauma symptoms from regular structures of society or consciousness or life. Because regular structures are fluid, dynamic, adaptable, and like we can adapt to life and evolutionary needs like climate change. We can adapt to this. But trauma is frozen and doesn't want to develop or adapt because its job is to hold something that was very painful. And as long, I think, as we don't understand this on a much wide, I mean, there are specialists that understand it, but as a collective. So then responding to global challenges, to COVID, to climate change, to racism, to so many important issues, we are simply very foggy in the response. And that's why it's slowed down. And that's why it looks like it's not working well. And I think that's a misunderstanding of the process.
It's really interesting when you talk about numbness and in the society as a symptom of trauma. That explains why there's so much indifference. Indifference when we initially is indifference towards traumatic things that happen far away. Currently, India is suffering the worst COVID, both death and infection. We watch it from distance. There's indifference, but also indifference in terms of the everyday life. We walk past homeless people. There is a kind of indifference in us as a society. So that numbness is really interesting for you to highlight. In fact, those kind of numbness is not in the sense that each individual we just a lack of caring. It's because we are living that symptoms of trauma, and that is a numbness. Okay. Yeah, that's beautiful. And to such extent, trauma is normalized. And one part of society is so privileged, and the other part of society is so oppressed. And we just normalize it. Seeing this as a fine, this is how the world is. By accepting it, we normalize trauma. It's very, very helpful insight. Now let's just go to your book. In your book, you quoted Elie Wiesel's words, and that's very beautiful. And it says, human suffering anywhere concerns men and women everywhere. I think that's how it goes. So now, this is a very powerful, because that just shows that you cannot be numb, because when you be numb or you're different towards other people's suffering, you'd not realize that their suffering also concerns us here. So would you use the slavery, transatlantic, because that's our work, use transatlantic slave trade and slavery as an example, and to say more about how as humanity we're actually living this collective trauma, and how the scars of the past continue to torment us physically, but also psychologically and spiritually.
That's very big question. I'll see where to start. First of all, I want to underline what you said about the numbness, that I think we are so used that our attention, introspective or our attention in life, goes to where there's a lot of energy. A lot of energy might be a lot of aliveness, creativity, innovation, development. A lot of energy might be stress, tension, and hyperactivation, which is a trauma symptom. Too much stress, because traumatic experiences are overwhelming. So there's a lot of stress until we freeze and dissociate. But the other side that is under-researched, I believe, and under-valued by nature, by the nature of the focus of our attention, is that I'm not aware in my own introspection, in my own nervous system, where I am absent. Because the nature of absence is that I'm absent, that it doesn't arise in my consciousness. So absence not arising in my consciousness is leading to the fact that my focus of awareness barely goes to absence. I need to be looking out for it consciously because I know absence is so important. If we look at this in a wider frame, the absence in our society holds a lot of information, but it doesn't appear anywhere. It's many files of information that are like kind of forgotten in the collective awareness that we don't feel. And I'm not talking about symptoms. We see the symptoms of the absence, but we don't see the absence. We don't feel the absence itself. And one way how we call this is indifference. So that when I hear about an event that happens in India right now, or a school shooting in the US, or anything that happens in the society, me having space enough to notice when that CNN feed appears on my phone, I'm cognitively aware of a massive event. Somebody takes a gun and shoots around. But am I a contemporary witness? Most probably not. Because for me to let that information go to all the filters and defense mechanisms that my psyche already built, not to get collectively overwhelmed, is not so high, and it touches my numbness that I am not aware of. So often I don't feel that emotionally or physically, I can't really process what I'm reading. So we are living in a time where many of us are cognitively overwhelmed with information and emotionally and physically turned off in many moments. And I'm not saying at all that we should be feeling everything. What I'm saying is we need to become aware where the feeling ends and just be at that edge where the conscious universe, the sensing universe ends. Because absencing is the reverse of presencing. Otto Schama talks beautifully about presencing and absencing. And so I think that's one thing. And now when you look at the after effects of slavery, or as we see today as racism and a massive oppression and an ongoing traumatization again and again and again, that the reenactment of trauma, like recently somebody asked me in a class, like, are we responsible for the crimes of our ancestors? And I said, that's an interesting question. You're not responsible for the crime of your grandfather, but you are responsible for the after effects he creates. And responsible means being able to respond to. If I turn away from the past of my grandparents or my great-grandparents or anybody basically, then I will be an unconscious conduit of the trauma that reenacts itself through me again. And I would say, no, but I'm not acting like my grandfather. I say, no, you're not acting like your grandfather, but you are not aware of how you are reenacting the trauma, maybe through your indifference, maybe through being part of an oppressive system today that you are not even aware of, that you are part of that system today in its entirety. And so when responsibility, the ability to respond to our ancestral past, is the only way that inserts possibility in my conscious action to change a system. And I think that's very important when we look at the after effects of or let's say now, structural violence in the US. it's a system. So we can now look at from the outside, okay, there's structural violence. But what I'm saying is also, yes, that's true. We need to deal with how to create protection and how to save life and how to stop the re-traumatization. But we also need to look what that structural violence is an effect of within ourselves. And that's much harder because as long as I externalize structural violence, I say it's out there. And I'm saying, no, it's as much out there as it's in every citizen internally wired. And that's much harder to comprehend. It's very complex because then I start to look, okay, no, but I'm not, I'm a good guy. You know, the stuff happens there. And that gap, I mean, there's a totally unconscious racism. Then there is the awareness of racism. But even in the awareness of racism, it looks like it's outside there. The others are racist. And then we come to, oh, maybe I'm also maybe we are all participating more or less in the racism that we see around us, that seems like around us. And that inquiry is painful because suddenly it concerns all of us. And we cannot be on the good side because we are on no side, like we are part of that system of structural violence, all of us. And that's a calling for a deep introspective awareness, plus a new level of engagement to change the system. But that often there's a reactive attempt to change the system. And I'm talking about like a re-owning of internal processes that contribute to the current system. And then the evolution that happens out of that. And I think that's pretty challenging. That's why we are still on a level often that we are reactive, because we when I say we, is like as the collective society, when you read the news or when you hear like about how it's being dealt with, I think there is still a predominant externalization of the problem instead of an interdependence between my internal state and my surrounding, that it's an interdependent whole, not two. It's not me and the outside.
I'm just wondering if you could comment on, this is something very unique and very beautiful in your book, that you said the future can rewrite the past. And you used the term retrocausality to describe the influences in the present or from the present can impact on the past. And by impacting on past, we rewrite the past and thereby changes past and changes our future. So please say more about that.
That's a complex question. I hope the answer is not going to be too complex, but I need to create a context for the answer because it's not just so simple. Let's say there are two ways to see time. One is time is a linear process. It comes from yesterday, it goes to tomorrow. But the way I look at time is a bit different. Is yes, there are rhythms and cycles of nature like days, and there is kind of a flow of time. But for me, there's a difference between integrated history, that's the history that has been experienced, and integrated into presence. So that's all the things humanity learned so far, and integrated that into a complex nervous system, body, emotional systems, mental systems, societal systems, and so on. But the real past is unintegrated history, like split of energy that hasn't been integrated yet and is waiting to be integrated, which means the learning hasn't happened yet. So this is a lot of intensity that is often switched, unconscious, numb, dissociated, or closed away. And it's a lot of information that life holds, but without awareness. We could call it also the unconscious or the collective unconscious. So now that unconscious dimension, these are literally parts of our nervous system that have been tuned down, turned off, so that the content that happens in those parts of my nervous system, my body, my emotions, and so doesn't arise in Thomas as subjective experience. It's happening, but it's without me. I'm not there, although it's happening within me. And the same is true for the culture. There are many processes that happen in the culture unconsciously without often the awareness of the cultural body. And so when we say, for example, let's say my grandparents were traumatized in World War II. When I do the healing work that I do, and I include my grandfather's or grandmother's trauma, and there's a healing happening in me, it means that I integrate unintegrated past of 2 generations ago through my own healing work. But I need to invest something, otherwise I'm perpetuating the trauma of my grandparents unconsciously in my own life. So in a way, tending to lovingly, as you said, brings the past, the split of past, into presence through me or through you or through anybody that does that, and integrates past into presence. Because the only way to integrate past is in the present moment. But in fact, I'm also the future of my grandparents. And now the question is, how does my activity today, how did that impact my grandparents in the Second World War? So is there kind of a retro effect back from the future, me, Thomas, to the past as a resourcing that my grandparents experienced when they were in very difficult situations, or when children go through very difficult childhood experiences? Is there the fact that later on in their life, we integrate those traumatizations? Does that integration affect the moment of traumatization? And I think these are very important questions, because we might easily disregard that as no, it's just what's happening here. But the interesting part is when we open ourselves to the possibility that the future impacts now, then the question is, what impacts us in this conversation now in the future? How did the collective healing that will happen in the next 50 years, how does that impact us having this conversation today? And I think it's very important to open the line of time to see if there is not a much higher resource that we call future, but that kind of future is different from, in the moment we create trauma, we create kind of an imaginary future that is the time that it needs to integrate that trauma again into presence. That's why I said it's a bit of a complicated answer maybe, but in the moment I create a split of past, I create an imaginary future that is kind of the mirror of that past that is needed to integrate it. That's not the future that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the future that is our potential higher development, the potential world to come. So the update of humanity, the update of every one of us as a human being that is needed to build a new world, because we cannot build the world by being old people, like old people. My old version, Thomas' old version, cannot build a new world. I need to change in order to build a new world that is more able to tackle climate change, for example, or to take care of other global challenges. So as my old version, I can't build a new world. I need to become a new version of myself. You become a new version of yourself, and together we are able to build a wider future. And so when we take the impulse of the future, the developmental impulse that we call nowadays innovation capacity, that's not just a coincidence, but that can become an ability, that my future is actually a resource in my life every moment. It's something we can practice. And I think Otto Schama has one way in the theory some mystical traditions have some ways how to practice, that the future will be a constant potential influence on my everyday life. We call it inspiration, we call it innovation capacity, we call it sometimes creativity. And so that whatever is coming from the future to us as impulses, insights, new understanding, new innovations is one way. But the other way is being responsible. Am I able to respond to the future needs? And am I able to live a life that includes the future generations? So that my choices today are not only informed by what I want and what I need, but that the next generations inform my choices today as much as my ancestors inform my choices and the world around me. That's like the cross. Yeah. The future, the ancestry, and 2021 at the moment. And I think that's amazing. That means the entire cross is relational. It's my relation to innovation. It's my relation to where we come from, to our roots. It's my relation to everybody in the world, from the closest circle of intimacy up to the global community and beyond. And I think that's very exciting that I don't exist separate from my future, that I'm an interdependent system with my future and my ancestry and everything around me, is that presence is all of it. Presence is what's happening now. It's where all the past finds a home in now, and where the future is being born. Because the future is only being born now.
It's beautiful. That's very beautiful. Wow, it's beautiful. Thank you so much, Thomas, for sharing your narrative of love with us today.
Thank you.